Welcome back. It's Beyond the Box Score, the show you guys all know and love. It's part 2. It's the Thursday edition when we get to dive deep into everything we missed on the Monday version. Jacob and I are really excited about this. First year with this, and this was an episode we kind of circled on the calendar before we even started this when we were in our preliminary discussions about what's going to happen. So I'm Dan Schneier, your host. Jacob Gibbs is my co-host. And today we're welcoming on two of our favorite analysts and friends in the business. It's Scott Barrett and Ryan Heath of fantasypoints.com. You know them from their fantasy points data. And if you don't, then you haven't been following Jacob's newsletter or any of Jacob's Twitter, because he's tweeting out dang stats from them. And I think I just called myself Damn Schneier, as Jacob Gibbs just pointed out. When I do these intros, I'm still in these early stages of figuring out this host duty. So when I do these intros, there's times I just rush through words, and that was one of them. We're going to roll with it. And you can also find them on School of Scott. That's Scott's podcast, the Dynasty Points podcast for Ryan Heath, if you want to get into the Dynasty. On Twitter at RyanJ_Heath, and on Twitter at Scott Barrett DFP. That's a throwback to the days when Scott Barrett and myself were writing for Pro Football Focus. That's Dude Fantasy Pro, and I love it. Without any further ado,
and that was DFB with a B.
With Dude a B, Fantasy not Pro.
Yeah,
I'm going to get this intro right at some point, but for today, that may not be the case. Without further ado, that was a long ado. How are we doing today, Scott, Ryan, Jacob?
I'm doing good, man. I think this is the first time I've seen you since you were at my apartment back in New Jersey.
This is true. We used to live near each other. We never got to play basketball together. That's something I still regret. You're like, yeah, I'm balling these days. I got all these pickup games. I was like, all right, where can I find a pickup game? And then I just kind of never followed up. So that one's on me.
Well, I wish we could have played poker together, because you're such a legendary poker player. I might have learned.
I don't know if you really wish that. You might be careful what you wish for, kind of thing. And that's just kidding. What's going on, Ryan?
Hey, I'm great. Yeah, excited to chop it up with you guys this week. Yeah, should be a fun show. Been looking forward to this for a while.
This is Ryan's first week full time with Fantasy Points.
Very nice. Very nice, right. Ryan. Welcome to this degenerate world that we are all part of. But I want to start with kind of some of the stuff you guys do over at Fantasy Points, just in case people haven't been following Jacob's newsletter or don't know your work. So I want to talk a little bit about what you guys are cooking up over in the data suite over at Fantasy Points, some new things that maybe people can be on the lookout for, or some things that are really perfecting itself this year.
Yeah, I have to say, I love Jacob. Jacob is maybe my favorite person on the planet. He has just been such an amazing ambassador for the Fantasy Points data product. Like, zero affiliation whatsoever. He just really believes in the product, and he's, one of the best fantasy analysts of all time. He's always cooking up dang stats, good actionable intel. We finally just gave him his own promo code a couple of weeks ago, but yeah, it's, if you've been following this show, I'm sure you know it. If you guys know me, it's really the most comprehensive, in-depth, accurate football data you could find anywhere. We have basically an infinite number of data points once you factor in all of our advanced split and filter options, really customized for the betting pro or the advanced fantasy player, where a lot of these tools just kind of hold your hand and do everything for you. I really like our wide receiver coverage shell matchup tool. That's something that sports books aren't looking at. It's not really factored in DFS ownership, but it just highlights to you which players have the most schematically friendly matchups. Like, we know Rashid Shaheed always smashes against zone. George Pickens smashes against single high, kind of does all that work for you. And we're constantly expanding to it, growing it. We launched average separation score, which has been a massive home run hit on social media, but we have 4 new tools launching next week, and we're just going to keep continually expanding it, adding to it. And yeah, Fantasy Points data, that's data.fantasypoints.com.
The child in me may always laugh at hearing the word ass to describe average separation score. But one thing I did want to get into, and I want to throw this over to Ryan. We get asked, I think Jacob and I, pretty much on a weekly basis for Beyond the Box Score. It's become like a joke at how often it's asked, what the heck is going on with the tight end position? Because I think Jacob and myself were both really high on the tight end position. We thought this could be the year of the tight end, and it not necessarily has been. So I know I heard from Jacob that you have a couple interesting data points at the tight end position. I kind of ask you to touch a little bit on those and maybe tell the listeners what we can expect from some of the tight ends we expected a lot from this year, rest of season.
Yeah, man. Oh, yeah. It has definitely been a little bit difficult at the tight end position. I'd say it's even more difficult because there's kind of this difference between data providers right now, where we are very careful whenever we're charting routes, which especially matters at the tight end position, to only count actual routes, right? There's a lot of other data providers out here where they will be counting routes where it's like a tight end blocking on a screen, or kind of like a little leak out where it's not really an actual route. Like they're on the field for a passing play. There's not an actual chance to earn a target in the traditional sense of a route, right? And we can kind of see that come through in some of the stats for tight ends, right? So Travis Kelce, for example, we have him at like a 1.7 yards per out run. That's well below where he's been for a lot of his career, obviously, but elsewhere you're going to see that much lower. Cole Kmet having himself a little bit of a breakout season, up at 2.07 yards per out run. And yeah, you will see him as low as like 1.7 in some of these other data providers. So I think it's really important to us to, as Scott was saying, to just be very accurate in every data point that we have in the data suite here. And yeah, I think it helps in terms of being realistic and seeing what's actually happening with stuff like the tight end position.
Yeah, I want to jump in here. So Kelce has been one that stood out to me particularly because I've been looking at this per route data for a long, long time. And really, on Scott's note first, I'm this ambassador for fantasy points. It's just that I love fantasy points and have needed this. Like yesterday, someone on Twitter was like, dude, thank you so much for your work. Like and the newsletter, like I've been looking for this kind of analysis for so long, for years, and I haven't been able to find the detailed matchup based stuff, especially not for free. And that's exactly how I feel about fantasy points data. Like as soon as I found it, I was like, yes, like this is what I've been looking for. I have a lot of this with True Media, but you guys take it even further with all the customization. And on the point about Kelce, like,
well, hold on. I just want to say, like, that's how fantasy points data came into existence. Is I just needed to know this information, and so we built it. Or it's like PFF has a contract with 32 teams. They don't know how to chart routes properly. Like, okay, let's fix that. Let's do that. Mm-hmm. And so that's like how it came into existence. And like you are in my DMs, and it's like, hey, why don't you guys do this? Or like, it'd be really sick if someone had this. And it's like, all right, done. We're going to add that next year. So like really tailored to, you know, degenerates such as ourselves who are obsessed with football data and fantasy data. And I think that's a great pitch for the site.
It's the sickos, like collective consciousness finding form. Amazing. But yeah, Kelce, his per route data has always stood out as low to me. And I've always thought that was weird because obviously he's the best, maybe the best receiving tight end ever play. And then this year you guys started tweeting about, well, what has been charted is his routes are actually way off. His route participation is much different than like what we're seeing. And then I went and watched it, and it's like, and from watching the Chiefs all the time, he does a ton of other stuff where he's not necessarily involved as one of the primary route runners, and then it's getting charted as a route. So I'm really, really excited that you guys are just, when is this coming? You're instituting like your updated route participation on the site?
No, it's been like this since we came into existence. We've been charting it, right? It's just like at a certain point, it's like, when do we call out other companies? Because like other analysts are using wrong information, and you know that feeds into targets per route run, yards per route run. With Kelce in particular, it's the Chiefs are one of the most like screen heavy offenses, and so it's a lot of instances of him pass blocking on blocking on a screen. That's not a real route. So like that's really what's negatively impacting him. But other tight ends on RPO heavy offenses, you see them run blocking an RPO that goes in as a route for some reason. So yeah, it's really important to us to have the most accurate data possible. And you see that with Kelce. I just tweeted about it. So BTJ by both PFF and Fantasy Points Data has right now like the best yards per route run average of any wide receiver since OBJ. But what was interesting about our data is Rashid Shaheed, who is like the wide receiver 5 by PFF over this sample, jumps to second his rookie season by our data. And, you know, I feel like that's super relevant now with like Rashid Shaheed, just so, you know, the big question, we just talked about this in DMs, is like, who is the real wide receiver one for the Saints? I know you're not there yet, but certainly through the first 5 weeks, it's been Rashid Shaheed by most metrics you want to look at.
I want to transition a little bit here to the O-line, D-line tool that you guys have gotten going. So give us a little intro into that, and maybe a takeaway that you have from what you've seen, or something that surprised you about some teams' offensive line or some teams' defensive line.
Yeah, so this definitely isn't like a tool I feel like I've perfected. It's just sort of the best way I found to encapsulate offensive line play and defensive line play. We're looking at adjusted yards before contact per attempt as a measure for how effective offensive lines are in run blocking, how effective defensive lines are against the run, and sort of just contrasting those two numbers to see who has the best matchups. Again, it's not perfect. Like Christian McCaffrey is one of those running backs who, like, okay, his like every single year, insane yards before contact per attempt, where maybe it's more on him and what he's doing than the offensive line. But for the most part, this is an offensive line stat. And then to measure the passing game, we go with pass rate over expectation. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Pressure rate over expectation, which is just based on the average time to throw. And again, this isn't perfect because you remember Tom Brady's final season with the Buccaneers is like easily had the worst offensive line in football, but he ranked top three, like the Buccaneers ranked top 3 in pressure rate over expectation. Why? Because he, you know, he can do checks at the line. He's so smart. He, you know, it was getting the ball out so quickly. It sort of like broke the scale. But this is still like one of the best stats we have over the last, 10 years, something like that. Or if you look at teams who win the pressure rate over expectation battle, they win like 61% of the time. If you just go by raw pressure rate, it's something like 54% of the time. And yeah, so you asked for a cool stat on this. I'd say Deshaun Watson stands out. So the Browns have the worst pressure rate of any offense in football right now. I think a little bit of that is on Deshaun Watson. He has the 5th longest average time to throw. Their average time to pressure is sort of middle of the pack, but still, like, even with that factored in, no. They have the worst offensive line. They rank dead last in pressure rate over expectation. And for his credit, you know, he ranks 2nd or 3rd in sacks avoided this season. So like, he still has it with his legs to some degree. I think it's that shoulder, which is just absolutely cooked, and why he, you know, please, Jameis Winston, we need this by Halloween at the latest. But that was one stat that jumped out to me.
I love it. All right, let's take a quick break to hear a word from one of our sponsors. When we get back, we're going to talk about first read targets. And that's something that's really interesting to me about the data that they work with over there, Scott and Ryan. So I'm excited to get into that. But again, let's take a quick break first.
We need your sports news anywhere.
We've got breaking news to bring you.
Then get your sports anytime you want them. Big trade news overnight to discuss.
Because we know you need sports all the time.
A lot of movement in the rankings this week.
A legend adds to their legacy.
We're bringing you that breaking news right here on HQ.
CBS Sports HQ, anywhere, anytime, all the time.
All right. One of the coolest things I've seen so far from the fantasy points data and all of the work that you guys are doing is first read targets for quarterbacks. Have always been interested in this type of stat. I saw at some point, people have taken some of the data and made charts out of it, that going into prior to last week, at least, Malik Neighbors was by far and away the highest first read target share in the NFL. That doesn't surprise me from watching all the Giants tape I read. But I want you guys to talk a little bit about what this first read data, this quarterback first read data is, and maybe some takeaways on some quarterbacks that you guys have tracked this season.
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing with first reads for quarterbacks is there's a few different factors in terms of what it means and also how a quarterback gets to a high first read target share. So it's obviously kind of tempting to say, okay, well, if a QB is only throwing to his first read, maybe that's because he's not going through his progressions correctly, right? And that can be the case, but first reads in general are a good thing, right? Over the last few years, the average yards per attempt on a first read is 7.9, just 6.9 on non-first reads. So the offense wants to be executing their first reads, right? The touchdown rate is like 5.1% on first read throws, 3.5% on everything else. So yeah, offenses average about a 67% first read throw rate. Obviously, there are guys that are a lot higher, some guys that are a lot lower. But aside from can the QB execute the first read, just some things that will kind of prop it up is one is just well schemed offenses, right? If you're able to scheme your first read open, that's great. That's kind of plan A for an offense. You'll notice right now that Tyler Huntley and Tua are both like leading the NFL in first read rate. That's all Mike McDaniel, like scheming up all these fast time to throws. I think the Dolphins offensive line is a little bit underreported how kind of rough it is, right? So I think just kind of scheming up these fast time to throws on these first reads to kind of get around that. Also, good wide receivers. Having good wide receivers to throw to is going to increase a quarterback's first read rate, right? We see this with Baker Mayfield right now, who ranks top 5 in first read throw rate. Especially having multiple good wide receivers has a big correlation to first read rate, because you can have multiple receivers on a first read. It's kind of an area of the field. If you have Godwin and Mike Evans both executing routes, good chance one of them is going to get open, right? So, and then that can go to the first read. And then kind of the last thing that will affect first read rates that I think is significant is just pressure rate, right? Andy Dalton has the 5th lowest pressure rate against him right now. He's, I believe, top 6 in first read throw rate. So yeah, just if a quarterback is pressured, that can kind of knock him off the first read. If he's a mobile guy, if he goes to scramble, that's not a first read. That's going to bring down the rates. Now, obviously, there's going to be guys like your Josh Allens, like your Pat Mahomes, is where, hey, it's good that they're scrambling. They're actually moving the play beyond the first read, which we would want if the first read isn't there. But yeah, I think it can tell you kind of which offenses are just humming correctly, and occasionally you'll get like, okay, this QB is clearly just not going through his progressions. I think we saw that a little bit with like Zach Wilson, for example, back in the day.
So Jalen Hurts, I think, is influenced by a lot of the things that Ryan just brought up. Number one, pressure. He's been pressured one of the highest rates this year. And then the other thing is obviously A.J. Brown being out has really affected it. So his first read rate is way down. It's almost as low as Josh Allen's, second lowest in the league. C.J. Stroud's is way down this year. I was curious to get your guys' take on that. I think that probably has something to do with pressure. But he's had a pretty healthy group of receivers. It's down from 67% as a rookie to 62%, which is the 3rd lowest. And I think it might go even lower without Nico. Do you guys have any thoughts on Stroud or anything you've seen from him in Houston?
The only thing that springs to mind there, and shout out to Scott DiBenedetto, who's our O-line, D-line guru. He spent the last 10 years as a scout with the Browns. He found what's really been Houston's kryptonite is stunts. Defensive line stunts has really just nuked CJ Stroud this year. And so maybe that's what plays a role into the first read target share. But you look at his splits versus stunts or without stunts, it's really egregious.
Interesting. That Vikings defense definitely got him.
Yeah.
Trevor Lawrence has a really high rate, and his has always been high, or at least since his rookie season, it's always been high. I think that's just an interesting note for Brian Thomas Jr. as BTJ seems to be establishing himself as the top read. We'll see what happens with Evan Ingram back. But last week, it was the 2nd straight week that BTJ had a rate over 30%, and no one else on the team had a rate above 20%. And so it's kind of becoming like the offense funneling through him, and everyone else just kind of playing complementary roles. So if it stays that way, that's really exciting because Lawrence does kind of lock in on his top guy. Another guy who does it is Kyler Murray. He has the highest rate that's not a Dolphins QB. And so if we do see Marvin Harrison start to get more design looks, I think that could be really interesting there. Whereas target rate is potentially higher than most traditional X receivers. Because so far it's been a bit frustrating with his first reads, Marvin Harrison Jr. And then Jaden Daniels also has a really high rate. I think that makes sense. Rookie Cliff Kingsbury, we've seen them kind of simplify things there. Terry McLaurin is one who's benefiting from that in a big way. His first read target rate is higher than it's ever been.
One of my key takeaways I had just listening to Ryan, I think is really important about this is it's not necessarily a mark of an offense or a quarterback struggling. I think it's opposite, as Ryan said. Like the goal of your offense, at least in my mind, is you finding pre to post snap what the solution is going to be. And that's going to be the first target most of the time, right? And if that solution's wrong and you have to go to your second or third reads, that's on you. That's on the coach and the play design. And it's on the quarterback, not understanding where that, not being able to make a check at the line of scrimmage or change where that's going to be. So I almost look at these first target rates as a good sign, I think, for the health of the offense. I would love to see if that correlates over the length of the season, but it's really interesting data that I'm intrigued by. And I think as far as the receivers go, it's a great way for us to know, like, which receivers are going to continue to be heavily targeted in the offense. So why don't we get a little bit into the data of wide receiver target share on first reads?
Yeah. So you mentioned Malik Neighbors. I've never seen anything like it. Have you guys? To start, not even just to start a career, but to start a season, it's like 50% of the Giants' first read targets. I wonder if it's even sustainable.
Yeah, I don't know. It looks a little bit like, Cooper Kupp, prime Cooper Kupp. This was sort of my justification for, I don't know if I ever said it fully with my chest out, but it was gnawing at me, nagging. Like I wanted to rank Neighbors above Marvin Harrison Jr. this season. And, it's like, I think they're comparable talents. Like my confidence that MHJ is more talented than Neighbors is like, 55%. And then like my confidence that this is a better offensive environment was again 55%, where everyone else had it like 80% Cardinals better because Daniel Jones stinks. I was like, well, they were bottom 3 in pass rate over expectation last year. But really the big key thing is like, I am projecting a gigantic, massive target share from Malik Neighbors. And we're seeing that in first read target share. And the crazy thing is, I feel like it could be higher because part of my justification for how high I was on Neighbors was like, well, looking back at college, he was a screen god. I think he had like the 3rd best career missed tackles forced per reception of any wide receiver ever. Insane production on screens. And we're seeing that, but we're not seeing it a ton. It's like, I was hoping like 50% of that PPR scam Wan'Dale Robinson role would go to Neighbors. And I don't know how you feel about this, Dan, but like Wan'Dale is like my least favorite. I'm a Giants fan too. It's like my least favorite player is like how many times does he get a target and fall 1 yard short of the first down? How often does he get targeted like exactly 1 yard behind the first down marker and still not pick up a first down? It's just like 12 targets, 53 yards. What are we doing? So like give a bigger chunk of those to Malik Neighbors, please. Like he's so much more dynamic after the catch. But yeah, man, this was Neighbors. I called him one of my Exodias, which just means like he's going to break leagues this year. And so I love what I'm seeing thus far. You look at the efficiency when it goes to Neighbors, it's so much higher than anyone else on the team. So it's like, yeah, I think there's a good chance this sticks, but I'm curious if Ryan has any extra thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'm kind of two minds with Neighbors, right? Yet I agree with Scott in terms of, yeah, it's very surprising to me that they've just kind of stuck him on the outside and said, go win. And that's great because he has been, right? Yeah, and he's doing it. Yeah, so obviously if you were getting the screens, that would also be pumping up like those design targets, that first read share. But I think also kind of importantly is outside wide receivers also are just naturally going to have higher first read rates too, because for the most part, offenses are starting with where reading to the outside, right? I would think even if they threw him into the slot, I would hope that they would still be doing that. It's what they seem to be doing with Wan'Dale Robinson, whether we like it or not. But yeah, I think either way, it's hard to not be insanely bullish on Neighbors.
Yeah, one thing with Neighbors, he was where I liked him best at LSU was in the slot and slot verts, so slot fades and things of that nature. We actually saw him create an insane amount of separation on what should have been a 50-yard touchdown against the Browns 2 weeks ago on a slot vert. Daniel Jones just missed him. Daniel Jones looked a little bit better last week on the vertical shots. They were actually on target for the first time all year. Some speculate this is an ACL thing. I think that's a garbage take. I think it's just, he's sometimes he's going to hit these, sometimes he's not, but there is room to grow. The point being, there is room to grow. Like, they're going to get Neighbors in these situations in the slot more and more as the season goes on, especially because last week they were proven that they can use Slayton in the Neighbors role. Essentially, the Giants just put Slayton in that Neighbors role last week, and he did really well with it. Over 100 yards, made a bunch of key catches. So that should give them the option to do what you said, Scott, which is few less snaps of Wan'Dale Robinson on the field and a few more with Neighbors in that role in the slot. And he can do so many more things, like you said, in that role.
The slot fade for him was such a cheat code in college. I pulled up the numbers and it was like 5x what we've seen from any other wide receiver. And it is like more of an efficiency hack in college due to the wider hashes or whatever, but still, like, dude was crazy good from the slot. Why not put him in the slot more? Take Wan'Dale off the field, but Hyatt and Slayton on the perimeter as the field. Why do the Giants, I need to just pick your brain as a Giants fan. Why do the Giants hate Slayton? And it's like multiple regimes who have hated Slayton when he's been great. Like, whenever he's been asked to, perform, he's performed. I think he's one of these guys who was ranked like top 20 in yards per target over expectation every single season, but it just seems like the coaches hate him for whatever reason.
He's like, I mean, low-key Khalil Shakir, like completely different type of player, obviously, but it's like, I don't understand it either. He's always good analytically.
The narrative, at least among Giants fans, is like he has so many horrible drops and key moments. I don't know if that's something that's bled over within, how the role he's used in, but he finally did. Like, he was featured last week in that Neighbors role, and it was really interesting because he performed really well within that. So I would imagine that could be a factor moving forward, but I still think this offense will be so concentrated through Neighbors. So I don't think, like, this is a buy time for me with Malik Neighbors, but I do want to pick your brains before we move on to something like other wide receivers you guys wanted to point out or maybe can touch on who have really high first read target shares.
I've got some more. Yeah. We need to move on from the Giants here.
Yeah, I know. I can't let him go too long.
So over the past month, the second and third highest, they're tied first read target rates behind Malik Neighbors, who has a 51% first read target rate over the past month. It's going up. Justin Jefferson and Drake London, both at 39%. I think, obviously you expect Justin Jefferson to be there, but he's been more of like the 5 to 10 range each year. This is the highest it's ever been. And I just wanted to bring this up because, like, I think it's possible that he's a good buy low. And that sounds stupid. You're not going to be able to like buy low on Jefferson or whatever. But the Vikings are 5-0 and they really haven't been passing the ball very much because of that. But if you look at their neutral pass rate, it's still pretty high. It's top 10. They've just been crushing everyone. So 38 players have more routes run than Jefferson on the year, whereas typically in Kevin O'Connell's systems, I know it's not the exact same without Kirk Cousins, but typically he's first. And so what if things even out and he just starts putting up 200 yards every single week? Like, I think that's definitely possible because the offense is funneling through him more than ever before. And then Drake London, like, this is it. This is everything. This is the data suite is perfect to just like describe precisely why Drake London is such a great buy in fantasy this year, because he's doing all the things we wanted before the season in terms of the routes that he's getting, the separation that he's getting on the horizontal breaking routes, the offense, funneling through him first read targets. Everything is there. Really, really psyched for London finally, because I've had the people here at CBS, freaking Heath and Adam and all of them, they're so obsessed with like the yards per target and telling me that Drake London's not good and Deontay Johnson's not good. And it's like, I don't know what to tell you guys. He's always open. He's insane. He's like Deontay Johnson if he was 6'4". Like, yes, he is good. And now we're finally seeing it. Last one is T. Higgins, 12th in first read target rate over the past month. That's 3 games for him, and it's been even higher in each of these past 2 games. His first game wasn't that high. Do you guys have any thoughts on the Bengals offense? Because it's really weird to me that Ja'Marr Chase's first read target rate keeps dropping, and we're seeing the offense really center around Higgins, and he's playing well. But I mean, so is Ja'Marr Chase, obviously.
This is a theory I had this offseason, was that we were like too high on the holdout wide receivers, but like there's nothing to do about it. Like you couldn't bump CeeDee Lamb and Ja'Marr Chase outside of the top 5, right? So I did just give like a slight bump to Higgins, a slight bump to Debo. But yeah, the theory was, I talked to a former scout about this, who's like, no, you really have to worry about these guys where, they can come back, they're out of shape, they can get hurt more easily. And then, like, more importantly to me, it was just, you have this entire offseason where one guy's out, Jamar Chase is out, T Higgins is in, like that could very well lead to improved rapport and more targets. And you are seeing that with the first read target share data. So it's like CeeDee Lamb went from like an insane 35% first read target share. Now he's at 30%. Brandon Ayuk was at 25%, now 20%. Jamar Chase was at 27%, now 22%. And so I wonder if that's what we're seeing, and it's just going to continue to climb. With Chase in particular, like just look at the efficiency metrics for him versus a Higgins, like fantasy points over expectation or anything. It's like, okay, Chase is the most efficient wide receiver right now, and Higgins is like well below average. So like you have to think that flips and regresses more. Like Chase's last 2 seasons, he was at 10 targets per game, and he hit double-digit targets in at least 50% of those games, and it's really come down. And so I don't know. I just have questions, and like the question is that a function of the holdout, but you have to think that's going to start to climb.
That's awesome. I want to transition this a little bit, Ryan, and touch base with you on this one. Something I'm really interested by: first down per route run, I believe is the stat. And why does this matter? Who are some of the receivers that stand out in this stat? And is this something we can use to kind of predict future fantasy success?
Yeah, it definitely is. So first downs per route run is probably best used or thought of as an alternative to yards per route run, which everyone kind of understands, right? It's a measure of efficiency. It's a measure of the receiver skill. Are they doing what they're supposed to on a per route basis? First downs per route run is kind of like that, but it can kind of filter out some of the noise, especially that comes with like the bigger plays. So okay. I think probably the best example right now is Alec Pierce versus Josh Downs on the Colts. Alec Pierce is like top 15 in yards per route run this year, whereas Downs is like top 3 in first downs per route run, right? So the guys that are better in first downs per route run, they're winning more consistently, right? Or they're getting good results more consistently. Alec Pierce has caught like 3 long receptions this year, and that juices the yards per route run, right? So yeah, I really just like kind of using them in conjunction, using them as a comparison tool to figure out, especially early in the season when we're working with like these smaller samples, just to see who's most consistently winning and involved in the offense and who's just kind of making big plays occasionally.
Do you have any other players that have stood out to you outside of that Colts situation? Anything we to keep an eye on?
Yeah, I would say probably another big one is Rashid Shaheed. It obviously looks amazing in yards per route run right now. Less so in the first downs per route run. It's Chris Olave that is leading the Saints in first downs per route run. So I think what that says, yeah, we know Rashid Shaheed is a big play guy. Olave is more of like the consistent chain mover. I do think that might be starting to change. If we go back to the first read target share for a minute here, over the last 2 weeks, Rashid Shaheed is top 10 in first read target share. After being at just like 28% over the first 3 weeks, he's kind of been getting more of like these shorter, easy routes, like more of like these layup types of plays. They've just kind of made him involved in every phase of the offense as opposed to his handful of deep shots every week. So I would expect Shaheed's first downs per route run to come up, maybe to be even in line with his yards per route run. But so, yeah, I'm kind of the Shaheed bull in the room right now, I would say. And yeah, aside from that, I don't know, like Chris Godwin is absolutely destroying first downs per route run. That's not too surprising, kind of in the Cooper Kupp role in the Liam Cohen offense this year.
Did you say it already? Sorry, did you say this already? It's more predictive than yards per route run, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes. Yeah. I probably should have led with that one, huh?
Yeah. Buried the lead. That was one of the most mind-blowing things to me this past offseason, because I've been like hammering pounding the table that yards per route run is the GOAT wide receiver stat, like efficiency stat, first read target share, the GOAT volume stat. And then yet Ryan did the study and nope, it's first downs per target, which makes sense. It filters out all of the big play guys, you know? But this is true of standard, half PPR, and full PPR scoring, which was a big shock.
Yeah, that's huge. People are often, I see on Twitter, like, why does this even matter? Who cares about first downs? It's like, first off, we should be playing more first down leagues.
Agreed.
I prefer that to PPR for what it's worth. But also, like, yeah, even without that scoring format, it is relevant. It is predictive, and it's a great stat. And the other guys I wanted to point out was Khalil Shakir is top 5 in first downs per route run. And I think we saw the offense fall apart without him. And his target rate is up this year. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if the offense is even more focused on him going forward, because he is a chain mover. He's reliable, and he's really the only reliable option right now for Josh Allen.
First in EPA per target, 9th in yards per route run, 2nd in yards per target over expectation. He's good. He's just really good. And like you said, he's also sort of in the Rashee Rice role, where he is seeing a ton of screens and shallow crossers, which is, we know that's such a valuable role, but leads to like a massively high fantasy floor week to week. Volatility is low. He's definitely for sure like one of the players I really want to be buying right now.
You guys mentioned. Go ahead, Jacob.
Ladd McConkey, top 12. It goes Justin Jefferson, Chris Olave, Ladd McConkey, Mike Evans, Amon-Ra St. Brown. That's pretty good company. Right after that, it's Brian Thomas Jr. So you've heard Scott talk about the yard per route run rate. That's obviously inflated by the big play last week. This is not. He just got 1 first down for that play. That's really exciting. I really do think the offense might focus more on him. Brock Bowers is top 20, and just behind him is Cole Kmet. Those are number 1 and number 2 at the tight end position. That's just awesome to me. Every time I watch Cole Kmet, I'm like, this guy's really, really good. The offense really doesn't give him anything. Like, he's rarely the first read, but he has been an important part of the offense. I think you can make a case he's been the best pass catcher, which is a crazy thing to say. And then Brock Bowers is obviously awesome, and his first read target rate is way up with Devontae Adams off the field, obviously.
I want to talk about one player with you guys that's been on my mind all week from a fantasy standpoint. We can get into it from a first down per route run standpoint, or just really any metric, or just your thoughts moving forward. But I was thinking about what you said about Rashee Rice, thinking about it like, Scott, he was one of your Exodia picks. He's my most rostered player this year. It's a very disappointing situation and it's sad. But as we move forward, I'm thinking about it like, realistically speaking, why wouldn't this role that we saw for Juju Smith-Schuster be the role moving forward? I can't really think of anybody on that roster who could fill that role personally. What are your expectations for Juju moving forward? How aggressive were you guys trying to get him this week? If he was still on a waiver wire, or maybe trying to buy low in a trade?
Yeah, so I don't think it's Juju. I think it's Travis Kelce who slides into the Rashee Rice role, which was formerly the prime Travis Kelce role. And you see that play out in like the first read target share data. But I'm gonna hand the ball off to Ryan, who can talk about this. There were a few fluky things that happened in that spike week from Juju, and then the underlying usage these last 2 weeks from Kelce has been great. So when you pick the ball up, Ryan.
Yeah, so I mean, Juju had like 50 yards where the DB just completely fell down on one play. And then obviously towards the end of the game, the interception off his hands in the end zone. So I don't know. It obviously always hard to get into like these coaching staff's heads, but I don't know if they come out of that like super happy or impressed with Juju and wanting him to have that, to continue to have that role. So yeah, I would just echo Scott you could look at last year before Rashee Rice became a full-time player, and it's like, okay, Travis Kelce, it is just his first read target share is extremely high. It's leading the tight end position. And then the second they come out of their bye, when Rice is running more than like a 30% route participation, it's, oh, okay, like all of Travis Kelce's per route stats just come crashing down, right? And we saw that again in week 4, in week 5. Kelce's first read target share was like outside the top 20 among tight ends, I want to say, through the first 3 weeks. And it's totally spiked the last couple. So yeah, I see him much more as well as the guy that is going to be getting all those easy slants, running after the catch, doing his thing, more so than Juju.
And that's why we go to the data right here, because sometimes the data tells a different story, and it's important to take a look at this. And I'm going to be tracking that going forward, because I just feel like I'm with you guys, but at the same time, I don't trust anybody else in that receiver core. I don't know how to explain it. I don't like. I saw Sky Moore get some snaps 2 weeks ago, and then they're like, all right, we can't put Sky back on the field and Sky Moore. And Worthy to me is just not the player that I saw. He's not used the same way he was used at Texas yet, and I just every time it's Andy Reid, I'm always a little bit nervous. But it'll be interesting to see how that offense moves forward. Any other thoughts here before we move forward and take a quick break to hear a word from our sponsors? Jacob, what you got?
Some quick ones on the low end of first down per route run rates. I'm curious if this is just small sample size or if there's anything you think is maybe a function of the offense. 3 guys. DK Metcalf has the lowest rate of the 3 Seattle receivers. Tyler Lockett has the highest rate. DK's rate is extremely low. Is that just random?
So I think it kind of speaks to just how he's won and sort of what his play style has been this year, which is just all of these big plays, right? Mm-hmm. And that's not to say that DK Metcalf can't continue to make big plays, right? We kind of know that this is what he's capable of. So yeah, I think I think for certain guys where if we're saying, okay, we're comfortable with these guys' ability to just produce above expectation, to always break off these big plays and have that be a big part of their production, I think that's fine. I think at that point, it's more of a style stat than anything. I don't think it's necessarily a reason to be down on DK Metcalf.
Yeah, I just wonder if he is maybe a sell. The big plays are great, but the first retarget rate isn't anything that blows me away. It's 27% compared to 20% for JSN and 18% for Lockett. So it is kind of spread. He has a 22% target per route run rate, Metcalf. So like that's not necessarily like reflective of the type of fantasy points he's been putting up. The other one is Jayden Reed, who obviously is just like one of the hardest players to wrap our heads around analytically because he just blows models out of the water. He has a yard per route run rate over 3, which is truly elite, and a first down per route run rate that is not close to matching that at 0.1. It's just barely above Romeo Doubs at 0.83. Do you have any thoughts on that? Like, it's just kind of strange for a slot receiver. He just doesn't function like a typical slot receiver.
Yeah. So I was way too low on Jayden Reed in my draft guide. And then week 1, he scored that touchdown or he had that big long catch. And I was just like, oh my God. I was no, he's a league winner. And so I've been pounding the table on this since after that week 1 performance. He is just an outlier. And so you look at over his last 12 games with Jordan Love, whatever it is, you look at the top players by fantasy points per route run, by fantasy points over expectation, by yards per target over expectation, any stat like that. And there's 3 guys clustered at the top in each one. And like Jayden Reed might lead each one of these stats. And it's Tyreek Hill, Deebo Samuel, Jayden Reed. And I just think Reed is an outlier like that. I think he is, sort of Deebo-esque, where it's just his volume might not seem that good, but the fantasy points are going to be so much higher. And so, yeah, I just think he's one, and like outliers win championships in fantasy football. And I think he's one of those guys. So I'm willing to just like throw out any efficiency stat as it relates to Jayden Reed and just, not be trying to project a regression to the mean.
Does anybody feel like you could be buying Reed, or are you just like, if I have him, that's great. Otherwise I'm just waiting and watching the show?
Well, I was saying he was a buy every week in the everything report since week 2. I don't know where he stands now, but I feel like he must be.
Any rankings that I make, people are like, you're way too low on Reed. I'm like, he's wide receiver 5.
Yeah, the time to buy was definitely with Malik Willis under center, but maybe that was too obvious too, depending on how sharp your league is.
The last one is Trey McBride. Just really strange. His first down per round rate is way down. He missed the game, but I just don't understand this because he seems like clearly the chain mover. He's the guy that Kyler's went to when Kyler's been under pressure. His first retarget rate is the highest at the tight end position. I just don't know why it's so low. It seems like it has to be random, but does anyone have any thoughts on the Cardinals? It's such a weird offense.
Well, he's just been really underwhelming, right? He's seen 9, 6, 9 targets, and what has he cleared 55 receiving yards once? It's really weird for a player like I love and bullish on. I think he's going to have some spike weeks. He's going to regress to the mean just because we know he's good. We know he's good at getting open. The volume's there. Probably just a matter of time. But you'd think with like Marvin Harrison Jr. running maybe like the highest average depth of route in the league, it really opens stuff up for him.
Yeah, his rate is truly like as low as it can be among like players who are highly involved in an offense that's not Amari Cooper. Like he's the next lowest, and that's just really weird.
I've never been as high as everybody else on McBride, unfortunately. I've been the low man on McBride, yeah, but I worry it was a little bit of take lock, which I've tried to evolve because I did not like his tape coming out of college like others did. I found him to be an overrated prospect personally, but then I watched last year's tape and I was like, all right, I can kind of see it. Still don't think he's much of a yards after the catch guy, and I don't think he's much of a touchdown scorer long term, which kind of caps his upside for me. But if he can get that rollback with the offense, you would think, like you said, I mean, the point about Marvin Harrison is so strong. Like with that average depth of target, there should be so much space in the middle of the field. I also think part of this is just Kyler Murray's not a good middle of the field quarterback. And I'm personally struggling with the idea that Kyler Murray is a great quarterback in general at this point. Don't think he sees the middle of the field very well. I don't think he anticipates that well as a quarterback. And the stats are just like that. Passing offense is just not. He's had very little consistent success as a passer.
I think that's fair. I think you're right. I don't think he sees the field very well, and I've heard that from other like really well respected film minds.
Yep. So we'll see what happens there. Hopefully, we can get that passing game on track because we got a lot of invest. I know Jacob's got a lot of investment in McBride, but we're going to take one more break to hear a word from our sponsors. Then we're going to get into the crown jewel of this episode, and that is the average separation score. We teased it at the beginning. We're waiting for it. We're going to get it right here, but let's take a quick break first.
There are some things in life that you can't quite explain.
An extraordinary story.
Maybe it sounds flawless, looks effortless, or makes you feel like a part of history.
The first ever goal for BFC.
And when all of those phenomenons come together, it's perfect. Pitch perfect.
All right, average separation score. Why don't we get a little quick intro into it, and then let's talk some players. Let's talk some interesting takeaways you guys have kind of just gotten to over the course of the season with this new metric.
Yeah, so average separation score. This is, one of these stats that I've wanted for, 9 years. You really can't use next gen stats, separation metrics. It's, it's all GPS tracking. This is kind of data that needs to be charted. It's only on targeted routes. Ours is all routes. It also like the top 20 list is like all running backs and Chig Okonkwo. It's because, it's like 3rd and 20 and you just throw the ball 1 yard. And yeah, of course the guy's wide, like so open. So yeah, that's what we have. And it's kind of like Matt Harmon's reception perception, except we have the full sample of every player, every route, every game. You can also filter it. We have different tools for coverage shell, face, alignment, route break, just a bunch of different things like that. And so Harmon does sort of like win rate. We have like per route win rate, but our best stat, most predictive, most stable is average. And so what that is we grade on a -2 to +3 scale, where a +1 is 1 step of separation, +2 is multiple steps of separation, then a +3 is like wide the F open, like, the Malik Neighbors play against the Cowboys. And we didn't know this heading in, but it makes perfect sense where a +2 is twice as valuable as a +1 on a fantasy point per route basis, and a +3 is 3 times as valuable and so that's sort of why I guess we're seeing it as the most predictive. And so, yeah, you can look at this, you can see who the best separators in football are right now. You could look and see who was last year and the year before that. I think it's a really good way to find sleepers and potential breakout candidates. Like if you look at the top 10 of the list, it's mostly guys with a high target per route run. And then you have Ladd McConkey and Luke McCaffrey coming in much lower. Yeah, I don't know, Ryan, anything I'm missing here?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring up Luke McCaffrey because I think he's kind of where I wanted to start here. So going back to what we were saying earlier about the high first read throw rate for Jayden Daniels, that's kind of what has been hiding Luke McCaffrey, right? Aside from the route participation, which has been coming up every week, hit a season high last week there in the slot. But yeah, Luke McCaffrey ranks top 4 in average separation score so far this year. So he's getting open. Yes, Daniel's first read has just been to McLaurin or been to one of the running backs in the first few weeks of the season. But I think this is kind of an opportunity to jump on a player who's playing really well early before we see the utilization start to shift, which for a rookie, it always can, right? Like he can always get more involved in the offense. And I even like it this week. The Ravens are giving up a lot of like big plays deep to the slot. That was a note from our lead charter, Brett Whitefield, had made sure to kind of point that out to me this week. So yeah, I like Luke McCaffrey this week. I like him kind of rest of season, just as like kind of a deeper stash in all my leagues.
I've got some guys. Tank Dell was the Ass King last year, and his rate is down a little bit this year, but it's still pretty good. It's still higher than CeeDee Lamb. It's still higher than Jamar Chase, Josh Downs, Ladd McConkey, Tutu Atwell, T. Higgins, a lot of these guys that have a lot of really good metrics that we're excited about. It's not a bad rate. And the other reason I wanted to bring up Tank Dell is because his first read target share is 13%, which is hard to believe, like just how low. That's lower than Alec Pierce. That's lower than Jonathan Mingo. So I know last week was frustrating and his route share wasn't where you'd like it to be without Nico. I think there's a chance that unless there's like truly something that we don't know about health-wise going on with Tank Dell, that he bounces back in a big way here with Nico Collins out. Jordan Whittington was another guy I meant to bring up with the first down per route run data. He looks really good there, and his average separation score is pretty good as well. The Rams loved him, 6th round rookie, who's not going to be here. His rate is higher than Tutu Atwell's. Brian Thomas Jr. has a really good rate. Of course, Trey McBride has a good rate. So he's somebody we talked about. This is a stat that does validate that he's a good player. Jalen Polk is somebody you guys keep like eyes can't seem to get behind it. He's not someone who's in a big way a lot. He's someone who's getting consistent separation, but not necessarily huge wins. So if you do look at their data in the data suite, they have like a +1 rate, a +2 rate, a +3 rate. And Scott mentioned that it's like multiple steps of separation is +2. Jalen Polk's +2 is only 0.9, which is one of the lowest. But his +1 is 26%, which is maybe the highest. The second highest. Only Brandon Ayuk is above him. Ayuk is another guy who looks really good in this data, and is somebody I'm not worried about at all. We saw that obviously last week. He finally rebounded. But yeah, it's just go look at this if you haven't, because there's so much interesting information. And you can look at all the different types of routes that they're talking about. Like this was my use case for Drake London, is that they're giving him more horizontal routes. And you can look at that specific stuff. You can see that in the past, he's won on these routes, really been one of the best in the league at winning on these routes. But his rate was low, and now his rate is high, and now he's doing better. And that was another thing that was interesting that somebody from your team pointed out to me, was that horizontal breaking routes are worth more in fantasy than vertical breaking routes. So that might be something you guys look into too. If you are.
Yeah, and that might explain why Tyler Lockett has a higher first down per route run than DK Metcalf, is he really gets the bulk of those valuable routes, the horizontally breaking routes. On Tank Dell, I just wanted to say, Matt Harmon talked about this on his podcast. He thinks Tank Dell's hurt and are just not fully healthy, and I think that's probably right. Correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't it the case that both Dell and Mark Andrews have that Tony Pollard injury? You know, we all went all in on Tony Pollard last year, and he said he didn't start feeling close to full health until week 10 or whatever it was. So that might explain what's going wrong with Andrews and Dell. Polk, yeah, that's one of the more divisive ones. Like you said, he's consistently getting open. He's just not getting wide open. And, you know, Danny Kelly loved him coming out. I'm like, oh, okay. What's your comp for him? And he's like, Jacoby Myers. I'm like, ugh. And then, you know, he's doing really well in our scores or separation scores. And I'm like, all right, what's your comp for him, Brett? And he's like, Josh Reynolds. And I'm like, ugh. And so like, I don't know. Basically the TLDR is he is a big a pure possession receiver who's never going to get really open, but he just gets open so consistently. And you have to think with the new quarterback, maybe this offense takes a much needed step forward. He is, I think, the best bet to be the wide receiver with the most upside, the best, long-term value, the one you want to be invested in. That's what I would say. But I'm with you. I think that's one of our more polarizing ones. Also, if you look at the list right now, the ascot is Adonai Mitchell. I think we're going to talk about him in a little bit. But number 2 is Jordan Addison. And you also see Jalen Nailor in the top 12. And so I think that's a function of teams really selling out to stop Justin Jefferson, who I'm with you, I think is a great buy low. His XFP last week was the second most of any player in any week this season. Vikings lead the league in passing touchdowns, but their dropbacks per game are like cut in half from what we've seen in previous seasons. But yeah, anyway, so Jordan Addison, Jalen Nailor, both right. I think that's a function of defensive coverage, defenses selling out to stop Jefferson. We don't have an ass over expectation metric, but we're looking to add that next year. And hopefully already we have the most predictive non-counting stat on the market. And we think it's going to be improved even more next year once we add that with a larger sample.
Andrei Iosivas, one more name I wanted to bring up.
He's Yoshi.
Getting a lot of horizontal breaking routes, and he has the highest separation score on the team above Jamar Chase and T. Higgins.
Wow. He smashed an ass last year as well. And especially from the slot, I think that's exactly where he belongs. That's what you're seeing now. And so he actually quote tweeted a Yoshi ass chart, and he was like, you can't cover us all. And, that's a great point. It's like, if you sell out to stop Chase, Higgins and Yoshi are going to be open. If you sell out to stop Higgins, Yoshi and Chase are going to be open. So yeah, I think he's a great sleeper right now.
I'm really excited just long-term about we'll call it average separation score. Just moving forward, this is data that we haven't had. And I think it's going to really make a big difference in us getting a little bit better as a collective community at predicting fantasy success and giving people the information they need. Ton of buy lows there, a ton of buy now, buy high opportunities that we went over today. But I want to wrap up here with some conviction calls. This is something Jacob likes to do at the end of the show, and I like this. So what do you got? Let's treat it like this, Jacob. Give me one conviction call you got for week 6.
Yeah, I'll go first, and I'll get in ahead of Ryan here because I know who he's going with. DeAndre Hopkins for the Titans has a big game here. Reminds us all who he is. He has the highest average separation score on Tennessee. His rate is more than double that of Calvin Ridley. He also has a high first down per route run rate, high first read target rate when he's on the field. All the things we've highlighted today. We just haven't talked about him because he's old. But he, might get his role expanded coming out of the bye, and he's got a matchup against the Colts. We just saw, and we've seen all year and last year, what top receivers can do against them. They play a ton of cover 3, and that's a reason to potentially like Ridley. But for what it's worth, this year, Hopkins has had the higher target rate against cover 3 of the 2. And that's always been the case for Hopkins when he faces cover 3.
I like it.
Yeah. So I guess leading into that, my guy is Calvin Ridley. And I've been kind of with Jacob on the Ridley versus Hopkins thing for most of the season. Yeah, Hopkins per route data has just been better, frankly, for pretty much for the last 3 years or more. But I think specifically in this matchup, I really like how it sets up for Calvin Ridley. Obviously, he has kind of the coach speak factor, where Brian Callahan was saying earlier this week that he hasn't done a good job kind of scheming Ridley up and getting the ball to him. But also in this matchup, the Colts have allowed the most receiving yards per game in the NFL on throws traveling 20+ air yards. And Calvin Ridley has easily the highest air yard share on the Titans right now. He's kind of been the weapon they've been using deep. And also, as Jacob mentioned, cover 3 has been good for Hopkins this year. Historically, that has been Calvin Ridley's best shell to work against, about a 22% boost to his fantasy points per outrun against cover 3 since the start of last season. So if I'm really looking for kind of the volatile boom game, especially in something like DFS this week, then I'm leaning Ridley over Hopkins.
Titans stack, baby. Wow.
If you can double down the Titans, you got to do it.
I was just going to say, I might have to now change my conviction call to Will Levis double stacks in DFS this week. I'm going to go with You're going to leave it to me. All right. AD Mitchell, the ass god, currently leads all receivers in ass. No Michael Pittman. Ideally, we get Flacco. We'll have to see. But the dude is just getting open at will. You look at +3 rate, so really massive instances of separation. And so I have to say, like, the Colts fans on Twitter, every time I talk about him, they're saying, okay, yes, he's an amazing separator, but there's like zero willingness to gain yak. He might have run the wrong route a few times. He's scared of the big hit. That might be true. I don't know. I haven't really dug into that, but I'm just going to go with what Ass is telling me. And I'm expecting a big breakout game without Michael Pittman there.
I love that call, especially because I saw today Josh Downs was not practicing. I'm not sure if he will or won't play, but that would, potentially be, and also going to be Trey Sermon again. So I just think AD Mitchell was my wide receiver 4 in this class, which I now regret having him over Brian Thomas Jr. because I think I've seen enough to know that I have to come off of that take because Brian Thomas Jr. is that good. But there's a skill set for AD Mitchell to be somebody who you're going to want to pick up in your leagues moving forward, because if that situation develops as I hope, now I'm kind of with you. I wish it's Joe Flacco, but it's not going to be Joe Flacco at some point soon, as far as just the passing game health goes, but he's a real talented player. I'll close out with this, my conviction call from the past, I don't know, however many months. I think this is the week where it finally turns and we finally move forward knowing and understanding that Tank Bigsby is by far and away the best runner in that backfield, and the Jaguars have had enough toying around, and Bigsby takes over. Not going to be a full-time workhorse, but takes over a role, a 60-40 type role in that backfield, an all-the-time red zone kind of guy, and runs with it. He was so impressive on film last week. I finally got a chance to really break it down and rewatch it from the end zone angle. And I'm just like, this dude is one of the better runners in the NFL. I know the stats back it up, the advanced numbers, but I think it's time that the Jaguars won their only football game running through Tank Bigsby. So this is the recipe for them. So that's
we got two Titans, a Jaguar, and
like, this is going to go ugly. We're in AFC South today. A lot of faith in the South, but thank you so much for joining us, Scott, Ryan. You can find all their work on Fantasy Points. Fantasy Points data suite is unbelievable. So check it out there. Find them on Twitter as well. For the rest of us, Jacob, myself, have a great rest of your weekend. Good luck in your matchups. Hopefully you found some DFS plays, some buy low, some buy now, some trade targets. Otherwise, we'll talk to you soon. Have a great weekend.